Has the Labour Party betrayed the Pakistani rape gang victims and survivors in the most sinister way? GB News' Charlie Peters revealed that rape gangs had operated in at least 50 towns right across the country. When Labour lost control of Oldham Council, councillors requested a full inquiry into the grooming gang scandal so they could out everyone who was complicit in it and a subsequent alleged cover-up. This letter from Jess Phillips was leaked refusing that inquiry, which then sparked quite a bit of outrage. Both the Tories and Reform then called for a full national inquiry.
Let us have the truth. Yep. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry.
What we need and what we're calling for is a rifle shot inquiry, one that looks specifically at to what extent were gangs of Pakistani men raping young white girls.
The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, then accused people of jumping on a far-right bandwagon.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right.
Well, the noises didn't go away. And eventually, Labour MPs Sarah Champion in Rotherham, Paul Waugh in Rochdale, Dan Carden of Liverpool Walden, they called for an inquiry, as well as the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. So in January, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper buckled under the pressure.
Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas.
OK, so you heard what she announced there, and that meant that it all went away for a bit. OK, so the press went quiet because it looked like Labour had a sincere plan to try to move this along and get some form of justice. But really what had happened is they'd bought themselves a bit of time. Then in February, so just a month after those 5 local inquiries were called, the barrister they put in charge of setting the framework for those inquiries, Tom Crowther, KC, who you heard mentioned there, revealed that he had to text a government official saying, "Do you still want me?" Which made it look a bit like Labour had never actually intended to have these inquiries. But we were reassured, oh no, everything's fine, it's all still going ahead. And then today, Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister, did this.
Will set out the process through which local authorities can access the £5 million national fund to support locally led work on grooming gangs. Following feedback from local authorities, the fund will adopt a flexible approach to support both full independent local inquiries and more bespoke work.
OK, so the day before MPs disappear for 2 weeks to enjoy their Easter holidays, Jess Phillips looks to have pulled the rug on what Yvette Cooper announced earlier in terms of those inquiries. Well, I think that they tried to hide today's announcement, but one Tory MP, Katie Lamb, noticed, legged it into the Commons and gave Jess Phillips and co a piece of her mind.
Over 3 months since the government announced these local inquiries, Tom Crowther, KC, a barrister invited by the Home Office to help establish them, knows almost nothing about their progress, and neither do we. Why is the framework for local inquiries now being led by ministers rather than by independent voices such as Tom Crowther? Why is the £5 million set aside for inquiries no longer being allocated but instead delivered on an opt-in basis? And what does the government intend to do about local leaders who say there is no need for an independent inquiry, like in Bradford or in Wales?
So it looks like the Oldham inquiry will go ahead and the others might not. This means that local officials who may have been involved in the Pakistani rape gang epidemic or the alleged subsequent cover-ups might not face the full force of an inquiry. Instead, there'll be locally led work, whatever that means. Now, when someone shows you their true colours, maybe you should just believe them, because Keir Starmer said, it appears anyway, that the grooming gang was a far-right bandwagon. Labour initially rejected an inquiry. They only said there'd be one, in my opinion, to shut the media up and shut the public up. Now, I don't think they ever really intended to have these inquiries, do you? And now they've ditched 4 out of 5 of them. And They tried to do it quietly. Keir Starmer has defended his record on grooming gangs on numerous occasions. Well, I would argue that he had his chance to prove it here, and it looks as though he's swerved it. This is an absolutely astonishing state of affairs that frankly beggars belief. I honestly think that this should be the terminal blow for Keir Starmer, Jess Phillips and Yvette Cooper's Labour Party. A Home Office spokesperson has issued a very strongly worded statement in response. They said, "This is patently false. The £5 million funding announced in January is being made available to local authorities to help strengthen local responses to child sexual exploitation, and all local authorities will be able to apply for funding for their local inquiries or other work in this area. The Home Secretary has written to every local authority on our plans to support local inquiries, and after listening to local authorities about what they need, we made the decision to implement the fund in a flexible way." Some people have criticised that and said, well, that might mean that local authorities now have the decision about whether or not they want to investigate themselves, which, given some of the aforementioned issues there, seems unlikely. Is this a massive betrayal of grooming gang victims and survivors by the Labour Party? Let's get thoughts from my panel. We've got columnist and broadcaster Esther Krakow. We have political commentator and GB News presenter Alex Armstrong and journalist Jonathan Liss. Alex, I'll come to you first on this. I mean, this, to me, seems like a massive backtrack from Labour that was an attempt at being hidden as well. You know, just hours before they broke up for recess, wanted to try and sneak it through.
Yeah, it's an absolute disgrace is what it is, Patrick. This is the most shameful U-turn yet, in my opinion. And I'm just... 45 minutes notice, apparently, that was given to Parliament to attend this debate. Obviously, the benches opposite were relatively empty. That's there to make the opposition look bad, even though that was a terrible use of scrutiny, because all ministers need scrutiny on their policies, and clearly they were trying to dodge that. So well done to Katie Lamb MP for showing up for that. But the reality is even reading that Home Office spokesperson's statement, it's quite clear they're saying they're not doing local inquiries. They're saying local, as you said, locally funded support. That's not the same thing. And quite frankly, the 5 local inquiries weren't good enough in the first place. We needed a national inquiry. That was already turned down. And this is shameless, Patrick. One day before recess, so they know they can't be held accountable. How utterly cowardly.
Imagine if this was the Tories. Imagine if this was the Tory party and Labour was able to beat them with this big stick about the fact that they were reluctant to investigate such a serious issue in this country, and they pulled this stunt. But even more, other than the whataboutery, what exactly do they expect people to do with this? Oh, we have a flexible fund, and if councils want to mark their own homework and make their own friends and other co-councillors accountable, they may be able to do that. It's a complete disgrace. These are the same politicians, by the way, that were happy to do all that theatre February last year in Parliament over a vote in Gaza, and yet not a single MP has ever stormed out of Westminster or done any sort of similar theatre or rolled on the floor crying and screaming, wailing for the gods to save them over these underage girls being systemically gang raped and brutalised by these men. That's what's clear.
We've just had Parliament devote quite a bit of time to adolescence, haven't we? We've had Keir Starmer do an adolescence round table.
Treating it like a documentary.
We're going to have adolescence shown in any school that wants to show it. All of this stuff. We need to clamp down on the scourge of misogyny. By the way, we do need to clamp down on misogyny. I'm not trying to minimise that. But what I am saying is here was a tremendous opportunity to do what they said they would do and have at least 5 in-depth inquiries into predominantly Pakistani rape.
And clamp down on that misogyny. That misogyny doesn't matter, apparently.
I mean, Jonathan, how would you respond to that?
Well, the first thing to say is that there was a national inquiry already, and the last government that Esther was talking about didn't implement any.
There wasn't a national inquiry into grooming gangs.
Well, it was included in the framework of that inquiry. It wasn't exclusively about that. It was literally 2 lines.
It was literally 2 lines. I read it. I read the report you're referring to, by the way. It didn't even fill up half a page.
All right, let's Jonathan in, because, you know, Labour, by the way, I'm at pains to stress, Labour sent a message out earlier on that said that they did give more than 45 minutes notice and all of this stuff. So that's
might have been an hour.
But Jonathan, yeah.
OK. So there was a national inquiry, and the problem with people, it slightly amused me that people kept on calling for a national inquiry, because those are the same people who normally hate what national inquiries do and then don't implement any of the results of national inquiries. And national inquiries, by the way, are a fantastic way of kicking an issue into the long grass. They take years and years to do, by which time the news agenda is passed on. So that's why they focus on the local inquiries. And the thing with the local inquiries is, and look, I am not inside Jess Phillips' head. I don't know what's going on, but I am prepared to give the government a good faith, take them in good faith.
Can I just correct the misinformation? There was no national inquiry into this. There was a national inquiry into safeguarding children, and the excerpt about the rape gangs was half a page. So to insult this country's intelligence by saying actually there was a national inquiry into this, that's not true. Secondly, yes, inquiries do take a long time, and there's usually no teeth behind it. One, they need to expedite this, and two, people that need to be brought to justice, it needs to happen ASAP. That's the difference.
There's going to be a massive issue for Labour going forward here, because this absolutely blew up over Christmas and January, and it was not going away. It was getting on front page after front page. We were hammering it here at GB News. We were desperate to try to get justice, finally, for the tens of thousands of predominantly young, working-class white girls who've been systematically abused on an industrial scale by predominantly Pakistani men. We were desperate to do that. And then Labour, it appears, bought people off by saying, OK, no, look here, finally, this is what we'll do. We'll have these 5 local ones. And then now, just hours before they all disappear for 2 weeks for their Easter holidays, they go, oh, sorry, no, we're not doing that. I just find, how can anyone trust anything they say going forward?
No, they're cowards, Patrick. They are cowards. This act should expose them for that. The fact that they've done this the day before recess and they did it right before the end of play of Parliament shows you the intent. If they really wanted to be scrutinised on this massive, massive U-turn that they only had those inquiries in the first place to appease the public outrage, if they really wanted the scrutiny, they give Parliament the time to do it. They did not want the scrutiny, and ministers should be held accountable for that.
2 questions here, Jonathan. Can we trust anything that Labour say going forward? And secondly, are they playing politics with the lives of rape gang survivors?
Well, look, I certainly hope that is not happening. And if we take Jess Phillips at her word, which I'm happy to do in this case, then this money is being made flexible. They're not reducing the funding or taking it away. They're making it sort of more optional.
They're reducing the accountability of those politicians to be held to account by the authorities. Let's not deduct that there are people in authority who need to be held accountable, and they are not going to be held accountable.
But why is it any different today from what it was
yesterday? Because they're getting resources to help the victims, not to hold accountable the authorities that failed them.
If it was your family member, if it was your sister, and she had been a grooming gang victim, would you appreciate it if the government told you, actually, the council responsible for safeguarding your sister has the option to not investigate? Would you be OK with that?
Esther,
that's what we're talking about here.
Well, actually...
No, but that's the point.
Esther, a lot of victims actually didn't want a national inquiry, and they said they already had the inquiries, and it was now up to people...
I'm talking about a local inquiry.
And they said a lot of people were saying when this debate was happening a couple of months ago that we didn't need any more inquiries. We just needed to implement the decisions.
You are wrong on this one. You are absolutely wrong. The public will think you are wrong on this one.
I'm not saying there shouldn't be inquiries. I'm literally stating the fact that not all survivors were unanimous in whether we needed more inquiries. But Esther was asking me what I thought if it was my sister. I'm just pointing out there are victims who didn't want any inquiries.
If a young girl was raped, brutally gang raped and abused, I think the least this country could do after systemically failing to protect her, the least they could do was to launch an inquiry and bring those responsible to justice. That's all I think.
It's also just about how do you misread the public mood. They must have got the public mood to begin with, Labour, because it was all over the front pages. It was a battering ram. And then eventually several Labour MPs decided to actually call for it, and Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, called for some form of inquiry anyway. And then eventually Yvette Cooper buckled. So they must have got that. They must have understood the strength of feeling behind it. So they must understand the strength of feeling behind this, and yet they're choosing to do it. And, it does make me wonder, what are they so afraid of? What is it that they're so afraid of?
Hold on, what possible incentive could you have to make an inquiry into something, a local inquiry into something so vile and heinous, optional? Why would it even cross your mind to say, actually, let's have the option to not do it? What kind of sick individual does that?
I wonder if it's about compensation, I wonder if it's about the possibility that if people end up going through a massive inquiry, that they are, like has happened in numerous other different inquiries, by the way, ultimately going to be awarded some form of compensation, and they feel as though that the sheer level of compensation they would have to pay potentially would bankrupt everyone.
I think you're right. I think you're right, but I think they're worried about that. Plus, because let's face it, it's come out of government pocket and there's no money left in government, as we know, the headroom's gone. but also, where are the councils this is happening in? What political leniencies are in those councils? And I can guarantee you this would be a wipeout for that political party. I don't have to mention that party's name because everyone who's watching knows where this is going on. And that party, unfortunately, would suffer severe consequences by the next election when these reports start coming out about what has been going on there. And I tell you now, that would be extremely damaging.
How do you genuinely feel about this, Jonathan? In your heart of hearts,
I'm not lying to you about how I feel about Patrick.
No, I'm asking you genuinely. If it was you there who was Prime Minister or you were Jess Phillips or whatever, do you think you would have just gone ahead with what Yvette Cooper had said?
Look, I think we have to also just zoom out a bit and point out that this was not a political issue at the last election. Not to say that it's not serious, but this idea that somehow beastly Labour is sort of conspiring against the will of the British people, where the Conservatives had nothing to say about this, the last election, and Reform, they did mention it in their manifesto fine, but they were not calling for a national inquiry or separate local inquiries either. This is an issue that has developed in the last couple of months. All parties are responding to it. It's also not based on any kind of new information. It's based on a historic crime.
What's happened, Jonathan, is that the Prime Minister has moved on. He's seen adolescence. He's gone, right, that's how we're going to tackle misogyny. That's how we're going to solve the rape guns. We're going to play that like a documentary in kids' schools, and we're going to demonise white working class lads over communities that are perpetrating terrible, terrible crimes in this country.
This is not a racial issue.
Well, unfortunately, it is. It is. As Katie Lamb said today, they are predominantly Pakistani rape gangs, and we cannot escape the truth of that. We have to face up to the reality, because if we keep on hiding from it, we are going to perpetuate the same thing.
I tell you, we should have an inquiry about the epidemic of sexual violence that happens in this country all the time, and that it's not a racial issue. And there are.
But this is an isolated issue that has been replicated up and down the country.
Look, I'm not.
It needs to be addressed for us to move forward as a country.
I'm not downplaying this crime at all, but there is a vastly skewed emphasis on this particular aspect of child sexual violence compared to all the other kinds.
Because it's so heinous, and because it would never happen in any other country. You would never hear the kinds of defences that you're hearing from you if these were Pakistani girls in Lahore who were being systemically raped by white British men from South Shields. That's the reason why.
I'm not
because
defending
the world
anything.
cannot. No, but the thing is, if this was somewhere else, everything that you're saying right now, that would even be a conversation anywhere else. Literally, not a single person will stand up and say, "But what about this atrocity? And what about that?" Like, no.
I'm not using whataboutism either. I'm not saying it's not serious. I'm saying
the reason why this is such a big deal. The reason why this is such a big deal is because we believe, many people believe, and there's been evidence to support that authorities who are elected people who we pay our taxes to, who are involved in a cover-up at the highest degree. How can people trust the government? How can people trust to have wider inquiries into sexual abuse if they can't trust the people who are elected to do it?
Well, how could you even trust the government appointing a KC to go through that?
Got to start somewhere.
Come on, I mean, you have to have some level of trust somewhere.
An independent person away from councils would be a start.
All right, look, I am at pains to stress again that Labour are adamant that this is not a betrayal, this is not a complete, total rowback on it. They are saying that hopefully that the girls can still get justice and all of that. I mean, we've obviously
they just have to go to France and come across back on a boat.
We've had a robust discussion about it here, so people can make their own minds up about all of that.